Hello and welcome to the BeanScene Podcast, where we aim to give baristas and cafe owners the tools to help them refine their crafts and help their businesses thrive. My name is Dan Woods, journalist with BeanScene Magazine, and today we're diving into a topic that I am incredibly excited to learn more about: Australian-grown coffee. We're a nation famed for our internationally renowned roasters and baristas, and our coffee competitors. Just think Jack Simpson, world barista champion, but not so much as an origin. There probably aren't many more people, if any more people, more qualified to enlighten us on this topic than today's guest, Rebecca Zentveld. She's been heroing Australian-grown coffee for more than 30 years since establishing Zentveld's Coffee in Newrybar, New South Wales, more than 30 years ago. And she's been president of the Australian-Grown Coffee Association since 2017. She's a real driving force behind the growth of this industry, and it is an absolute pleasure to be speaking to her today. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. That was a very generous introduction. Appreciate it.
We aim to please. And look, I feel like I do speak for the majority of Australian coffee lovers not involved in the right feet on the ground industry day to day in saying that I'm not as familiar with Australian grown coffee as I should be. You know, a big part of the country is outside the Bean Belt, and we're largely a pretty low altitude landmass, which aren't things you'd associate with coffee growing largely. But, you know, we have had coffee growing here for quite a while. Can you just give me a little bit of a background on how long we've been growing coffee in Australia and why it's something you're so passionate about and have pursued for so long?
Yeah. And I must say, I've come from Melbourne before I started my roastery up on our family farm. I did learn to drink good coffee in Melbourne. So that was my beginnings, was paying attention before I moved back to the family property and really got stuck into learning how to roast and make sure I was bringing out the potential best flavours. So why can we grow good coffee in Australia? And it's not just good, it should be at least specialty, a beautiful thing, a tasteful, delicious thing, is really because we're able to grow coffee. As you said, we're not high altitude, but what we make up for is we're low latitude. So we're the only coffee growing nation that's not in the equatorial zone. We're not around we're not in the tropics. We're subtropical. So being that farther south, we've had international agronomists tell us it's as if we were growing coffee in the subtropical region around Brisbane. I'm up near, say, a 200-kilometre zone around Brisbane, southeast Queensland, going round into northern New South Wales, where I am, in the hills behind Byron Bay. That beautiful little microclimate we've got there is cool enough. It's as if we were 1,600 to 1,800 metres high growing coffee. So we don't have the altitude, but it's as if we have the altitude because we're low latitude. The cooler climate, it's really about the cooler climate. That brings out a sweetness in the bean, just as it does in fruit development. We'd think the best tasting cherries or strawberries, for instance, are from down south, Victoria, Tassie. You know, they grow the beautiful, whenever I visit Tassie, beautiful strawberries down there, and cherries for sure. So the cooler climate, longer ripening time. We take 11 months to grow our coffee from flower right through to harvest. So I'm sure you might talk about that detail later, but really it's that longer ripening time with the cooler winters that we've got, and even the cooler summers, of course, that ensures that there's more sweetness in the cup.
So the two main coffee growing regions in Australia are around that northern New South Wales and then far north Queensland.
Yes.
Does, I guess, far north Queensland and around that Cairns space not qualify as tropical?
No, I'll talk through that. It is the tropics. We think that we know we're going to the tropics when we land in Cairns and you get that heat wave coming through. But then you go up the mountains and quick smart there at the higher altitude, and it does drop temperature. It is still hotter than here. Yes, it's the tropics, but there's little microclimates there. It's actually considered subtropical again. So they have got quite different soil structure types. We're volcanic soil in our lower subtropical region. They're more sandier loam soil, so there is a difference in flavour, but it's not a lot different. We've got sweet chocolatey and berry notes coming from the northern New South Wales, southeast Queensland, and they've got what I consider as quite milk chocolate, nutty biscuit notes, and that's been proven through some terroir project, which we might be able to talk about later on in the interview here.
Definitely. And I guess just quite simply, you mentioned that you came to Melbourne, learned how to drink coffee, learned how to roast coffee and really love coffee, and then went back and then started growing it. So what first led you to become a coffee lover in Melbourne and then I guess
Well, that wasn't
influenced you
hard.
going back. Was that, of course.
No, so I was in retail management, quite young. I was only 23 when John and I moved back after only 3 years. We did 3 Melbourne winters and went, okay, all right, Melbourne winter, that's enough. So we had an opportunity to move back to John's parents' farm, and it is beautiful. Newry Bar is literally 10 minutes up in the hills behind Byron Bay. And I'll put a little plug in to say we welcome visitors. So you might find that some of our listeners can come to our farm, or indeed have been to our farm over the last 30 years. It's a beautiful spot. But I went from Melbourne back to the farm because John's parents had grown coffee successfully for only 5 years. So they were in their second year of harvest. And in fact, they were selling the green bean at that stage, going, well, what do we do now? Now we've got to this stage. They had to learn processing. They were very innovative, very entrepreneurial first growers of New South Wales, really. And they got the industry going by developing the importation of the processing equipment. You need to have a harvester that was Australian made back then. We need to have water baths and wet mill, dryers, pulpers, all those things. So they really got that going. So they started the industry back in the late 80s, and then we saw that opportunity. So I set up my roastery, renting one of the spaces in the sheds, and slowly learned to roast well in the next few months to get the truly Northern Rivers not just single estate, but a single regional blend going at the time.
Well, it's funny, like Coffee Origin is, within the coffee space, it is genuinely one of my greatest areas of interest. I love it. I love knowing how different things influence how the beans turn out, the ball roasting and the different flavor profiles and the different varietals and everything within it. And I had a really good interview with the late Jay Ruskey only a few months ago, talking about Southern Californian coffee and how that is also an emerging origin. And the thing that really staggered me was the amount of scientific intervention that has gone into figuring out what types of coffees grow best within that region and then how to grow them. He helped sequence the genome of geisha coffee with a university over there, and he was that heavily involved with it. So I guess my question on that is, how heavily involved is the scientific process with figuring out what plants, what varietals, and I guess what just everything goes into helping coffee grow here in Byron and in North Queensland?
So a bit more historical context.
Yeah.
The industry really restarted, in fact, in the 80s, because we had a successful Australian grown coffee industry from the 1880s right through the 1920s. So it had won awards in Paris and Rome. Both Queensland Department of Primary Industries and New South Wales have got records to say that they took coffees to Europe and won awards. So my parents-in-law got excited by that. And hearing that news, it gave me the confidence too, when I came to deciding to start a roastery, that we should be able to grow good coffee. It was done here, 100 years ago, 80 years ago back in the day. And that's about that terroir, that's taste of place, that red volcanic soil, the microclimate that we've got. The conditions should be right for growing beautiful coffee. Back to your research point, it turned out that, and my parents-in-law, June and John Zentveld Sr., they were encouraged by the local Department of Primary Industries in 1987. They just completed a 5-year program on working out 5 varieties. They produced 5 varieties and worked with them. And like we're doing today, the research, what we're looking for is they were looking for obviously good yield and good taste, but also the structure of the tree. How did it look like it would be a productive type tree, and disease resistance. So all those factors were ticked off back in the 80s. And then the industry started, we all got going, the industry grew, at least 40 growers. We've got a nice little industry ticking along through the 90s. But no more research on varieties happened for almost 40 years. So we have to go right to today, to the last 7 years. So 7 years ago, we finally got access to more available research. And I'd like to give thanks to the World Coffee Research Organisation. They set up a big international multi-location variety trial. That's such a lot of letters. And we got to be chosen one of those. And that was in my first year of being the president of the Australian Grown Coffee Association. Back then it was called Australian Subtropical Association. But we've since grown enough and absolutely want to welcome the more tropical growers. So we're truly Australia-wide organisation the last 3 years now. But the point is, we got very excited to hear that we could have a trial block of 26 of the best Arabica varieties that WCR had isolated. And they wanted to be sure for climate change and, worries for sustainable coffee production in the future, to make sure there were different trial blocks set up. So we were successful in organising that. And the local university in Lismore, Southern Cross Uni, have been brought in to manage that over the last 7 years. So we can talk more about how exciting that is now we do finally have access to new varieties.
Well, what are the varieties that are most commonly grown here or that you've seen the most success with over these past 7 years since that research has started being undertaken?
Well, even to take a step back, we've had one variety for the last almost 40 years in Northern Rivers called K7. Exciting. It is Kenyan, beautiful Kenyan coffee. I think it might have been K7 row number 7, so that variety. Beautiful, as I said, lovely chocolatey sweet taste, great yielding. But the main problem with that variety, why we want access to new varieties, is it's too vigorous. All these research projects, they go for 5 years. So 5 years is never long enough. 5 years gives you a tree about, a bit over my height, between 5 and 6 foot. But by 10th year, our K7 just keeps growing. So then we're having to trim. So through the last 40 years, we might lose 2 years of production. You do a trim, the tree's regrowing, then it has to put out its new arms, effectively, its new horizontal branches. Then the flowers need to be set. That takes 11 months. So you're losing 2 years of production. So in North Queensland, they've got a shorter variety, thank goodness. So their Katoa has worked well. But they're old varieties, they're 30 to 80-year-olds. So it's really time to access some of these newer varieties, and we're thrilled to be able to have done the hard work, and we can't access them all, but we have been able to choose 4 select varieties from these World Coffee Research trial site, and we're at that stage now of trialling them in farms, that those who are interested to really want to move forward with the industry and see the good benefits that the new varieties bring, which I could go into more detail.
Well, what is next steps for this type of research then, and I guess furthering Australian-grown coffee through this more scientific process?
Yeah, we're really grateful that we've been able to gather some research funds. In fact, a whole new program's about to start from June onwards, 2026. So we've done the hard yards getting to this point with AgriFutures Australia, which is a federally based research development org. And they've selected Southern Cross Uni, again, the local plant science unit, to not just manage those varieties in the trial site, but now that we've selected 4 that we believe are good for us to be trialling on farm. So the idea is that the research goes towards measurements to see how these varieties perform. So we think about it from a farmer's perspective, we need trees we need to see how they go through the harvester. We have to do mechanical harvesting. There is no profitability for growers with Australian production costs and labour costs to do that by hand. Anyone who wants to come to my farm and do some hand picking, I'll see how you go after an hour, but you won't give me $40 worth, and you might think you're worth more than $40. So it doesn't add up to do the hand picking. So we need to test those varieties in the field, and they must be consistent with being as much as possible disease resistant. So at least have had that proven history, because we don't have that one coffee berry borer. We don't have that one bug. We don't have that coffee leaf rust, and we want to keep it that way. So it's important for us to choose those strong, resistant varieties. But also, there's been a 2-year project of research done already on the taste testing. So whilst they've been in the trial block, Q-cuppers from across Australia, and there were quite a few Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane tasters, 15 of them Q-cuppers volunteered to taste test, blind testing, of course. And they really proved that a lot of the varieties, and we've selected within that, true specialty, 82 to 86, grade coffee. So it's a lovely bandwidth for us to choose the new accessible varieties that should grow the right height and yield well. We want everything. We want them to be good size, yield well, taste great, and be free of diseases, so we can take them to the future.
Just want to tick off all those boxes and leave them ticked off forever, hopefully.
Correct. Yes, and this is why we've got new landowners and growers wishing to grow the industry and jump on board.
Beautiful. And I mean, this is setting up to be a huge generalization, but are there any, I guess, specific tasting notes that you might associate with, and I know it is a bit of a catch-22 because there probably isn't a typical coffee grown in Australia, but are there any tasting notes that I guess you see more than others in most coffees that are grown here?
And I was really pleased to have the terroir report done, because it did prove we have a tasted place with Australian coffee. And as someone who's been roasting, I was roasting 30 years before this was done professionally. So it won't just be me saying, it's really sweet and quite chocolatey, because enough customers have told me that as well. It's not just my taste buds. So they have worked out we are distinctly sweet, chocolate notes with berry, which is lovely. So there's a nice extra berry notes there, but definitely sweet chocolatiness. in our more subtropical, cooler climate. In the North Queensland, it is more chocolate with nutty biscuit, sort of like a drier chocolate note. And that's a pretty good combination.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't really like berry chocolates with a touch of chocolate biscuits? It sounds like I could mention a couple of brands of certain Australian biscuits or yummy chocolates.
I mean, it as a Melburnian myself, it feels like, I mean, Australian coffee culture is a milk-based coffee culture, and Melbourne especially, it sounds like those are tasting notes that would pair very, very well with milk, which is
desirable. Yeah. I'm a black coffee drinker these days. You know, you trained yourself, of course. No, I've been a black coffee drinker for ages, but we want it to work well with milk. And some of the things we can, of course, as roasters and processing, really can affect the different flavour profiles that you can bring in to that coffee blend or that flat white in the cup. So at the farm stage, 2 types of processing, particularly the full wet process where you're choosing the red ripe cherries and the washing process and then removing those skins and drying in the dryer. We can't be outside. We can't do that romantic idea of say cement beds and drying the coffee to parchment level outside, because we get a lot of rain. Every 2 weeks it might rain, or tomorrow it might rain. So that would cause mold issues. So that's obviously not welcome. So definitely we need the dryer for our washed coffees, for all our coffees. But also we have the naturals, because one of the challenges with growing coffee in our wetter subtropical climate, we don't have a distinct wet and dry season. So North Queensland does. So they can more manage their harvest time because they're managing the flower set and I'll tell you about that. They effectively stress the tree in the drier period. They hold the irrigation water back. The tree goes into a bit of stress when they want it to, and then it puts out flowers. Boom, there's a big, massive, beautiful white jasmine-like flowers. If you ever can make it to a coffee farm when the blossoms are out, it is extraordinary. We had this last November on our farm in the Northern Rivers. It is magnificent. It's really, really special. So they set their flowers all together, which means they're harvesting within 2 to 3 weeks. They've got a really nice, even red cherry lot. Predictable harvest time. In the southern cooler parts where it rains a lot, the flowers set anywhere from early spring right through December, January, even into February. So we've got red cherries going right through a couple of months. So we have reds and overripes. So we get a lot more of the mixed lots of getting some raisins. When a fruit dries a little on the tree, we understand it goes like a raisin or a sultana. So we need to process them separately and sort them out and put them in the dryer. But that makes a more interesting cup. So now we go full circle to don't throw them out. Then, they were in the early years of the early 90s considered waste product. The raisins, they should be rejected, because we had to learn that, no, you don't reject them. In fact, Dr. Ernesto Illy gave us that advice with an agronomist back in 1997. He was very kind, visiting my personal farm. I was so excited. I was, still in my early mid-20s by then. And he advised us, his agronomist said, no, you must keep the naturals. So we could share that knowledge then with the other growers at the time. And it makes it such an interesting coffee, once we're roasting. That raisin profile is like chocolate fruitcake. So we get fruitcake notes coming through in the blend, which I think is a terrific with a milk-based coffee.
So is that how you, I guess, manage that lack of a defined wet and dry season, is almost leaning into these different and interesting ways that you can harvest the coffee to then create different coffees?
That's it. Out of the challenge comes new opportunity, really. Yeah, so it's a good thing. Yes, we turned a problem into something that became very excitable. And, we certainly have won plenty of awards, not just ourselves, other coffee growers and roasters over the years, choosing Australian coffee, presenting that in the international coffee shows, whether that's the Sydney Royal or the Royal Melbourne, I should say, competitions. We've done very well with showcasing that way.
So can you give me just a bit of a sense of just how large this coffee growing industry in Australia is, how many farms there are that are doing it, and I guess the levels of success that it's seen over the past few years? Well, I guess over your tenure as president of the Coffee Growers Association.
Yeah, well, at least we're growing now. We did have a lull through the late 90s into the 2000s where we had at least 20 growers in our Northern Rivers region. And then if I take a step back, a lot of the landowners who became coffee growers, like a lot of us coming from the city, we weren't generational farmers. So I think a lot of other coffee lands, they have generational farmers. We haven't had that until now. We find there's a few second generations coming through. But in the 90s, they were new. in the late 80s. So we've got people coming from the city, coming to be landowners, becoming growers in their 50s. They've made some money. They've had their businesses in the cities. They decided to have the more retirement lifestyle farming scenario. That goes really well. You add 20 years on, they're 70 plus. They're allowed to start retiring. And the land value. So this is the biggest challenge of why we've lost some coffee growers. The land value, meanwhile, is going through the roof. And we really feel for youngsters today because our land values are, they went from 2 million to 5 million to plus. So who's got that kind of money to come in and be a farmer, especially as a younger generation? That's really tough. So we actually lost some farming land to being lifestyle blocks. Some of that's coming through now where we're getting, because of the interest of the new varieties, we are getting more investment. And so we've genuinely seen, to answer your question, we are a growing industry now because we've gone 40 years and now we've got access to these new varieties, and seeing that investment coming through with more research, landowners are feeling more confident to come and join us. So now we've got 45 to 50, but some of them aren't producing yet. They're just getting access to that seed stock, and it's only very small. Each of us are only getting like 200 grams of these new available seeds because we have to pick the seed from the trial block, and there's only 3 rows, at the most 30 trees, replicated 3 rows of 10 trees. So that's a tiny amount. So we have to share these access to the new varieties. But the interest is there, and that's what we want to, kickstart and appreciate your interest through BeanScene to help share the love.
Well, it is interesting because I guess when I speak to people who are in and around I don't want to say more established coffee origins because that's false, but places like Brazil and Kenya and Uganda and these probably more widely, used coffee origins,
Yes.
that the issues that they're seeing on the farms is the generational shift isn't happening as much because young people are going into the cities or looking to do something else. But it sounds to me that in Australia, it's almost been the opposite. The issue has been getting the foot in the door and starting as opposed to continuing on a family legacy.
And we have still got that same constraint that now they're feeling in the traditional lands. And I've heard this straight up from Colombian growers myself who visited us, where they said, that of course the younger generations want to go to the city, and good luck to them, as we did. A lot of us have moved from regional parts of Australia. I grew up on a farm, but I never thought I would be a farmer. Dad was a builder, but we had the lifestyle block. So, had the Melbourne city time. We're one of the unusual ones to come back earlier. But it was really the people in their 50s, like John's parents, who had started the coffee farm. And we have got those growers here today. With the Australian prices of land, I guess that's where we're at. That it's people who have made some money who are coming in the later years to become farmers. That is unfortunate. I wish we could have younger growers. And it's really tough if we've got young ones coming through and maybe studying agriculture or horticulture and want to get into it, but how can they afford the land? In saying that, you don't have to grow it just in the gorgeous hills behind Byron Bay. There are cheaper areas, and we're really finding that we're not just encouraging, but we want to guide new landowners to see where their blocks of land might be, and then maybe south of Sydney even. As long as with climate change, if it means that there's less frost, if you once had frost and now you don't, but you've got sufficient rainfall or access to a dam for some water so that you can choose to irrigate to look after the young trees in particular. Maybe you've got some red soil pockets, and we do, in other areas of Australia, like Western Australia. Southern parts of Western Australia where they're growing avocados. Pretty much where you can grow avocados, you could grow coffee. That might be a tip for people to consider.
Yeah.
So newer zones are coming on to select Arabica coffee and grow in wider areas. Plus, we're also getting new landowners who are more traditional farmers who are having problems in their industry, such as, and it's unfortunate, sugarcane farmers. Far North Queensland, tropics, poor sugarcane farmers, they're losing their mills. So, you can't grow the sugar if you've got nowhere to take it to for processing. So they're requesting varieties that suit those lower lying lands. So now we're genuinely needing to look into Robusta.
Yeah.
See if we're going to go, let's see how quality Robusta we can grow. We know there's a demand for quality Robusta.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, in that we've seen the development of the Robusta flavor wheel over the past few months, and it really feels like people are starting to turn to Robusta in some of those more traditional Arabica growing regions because it can be that little bit hardier and tougher, and do you see a future in Australian grown coffee where Robusta is not necessarily the majority, but has its own really established segment of the market?
Yes, we can visualize that now. Yeah. And even a couple of years ago, I didn't have that vision. We were very much focused on the Arabica, coming into specialty grade. We really wanted to bring up the growers so that every grower who's producing understands the green bean levels that you should be at, the quality levels. I wish more growers, we need to encourage more growers to not just subscribe to BeanScene, but to come to mice so they learn and can see the examples. When you see the other origins, I've been someone, and my husband and I, John and I, we would go to the trade shows in the States when we had to. We had to leave Australia to be able to go to the trade shows that now mice does for us, that will be able to easily taste coffees from around the world of the origins and see the qualities and do the educational programs. So we're really wanting to bring the other growers, and certainly some are absolutely self-educating beautifully. And as an organisation, that's part of our mission, is to ensure that we're raising the standard of all Australian green bean, because there's so little.
Yeah.
We're less than 800 tonne a year, which is something like, it satisfies less than 0.03% of the Australian consuming market. Like, it's 99.97% of coffee that we drink in Australia is foreign.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of room for us to grow, but we've got to do it well, haven't we? The grower needs to be profitable. And in order for them to be profitable, they need to get a good price. They need to do a good job.
I mean, top of my head, that 800 tonnes is comparable to an origin like, say, Nepal, I think, which certainly is not one of the traditional big boys. But I mean, there are some wonderful things happening in Nepalese coffee as well. But obviously, we're here to talk about Australian coffee.
That I don't know. I've heard of it, but I haven't tasted it.
From an Australian cafe owner's perspective, or from a cafe's perspective, now I know that there are a lot of Australian roasters that will, offer Australian grown coffee all year round or a limited release basis. And there are some that are really heroing it and really trying to push it forward. But if I'm a cafe owner, quite simply, why should I invest in Australian grown coffee and expose my consumers and my audience to it?
Where I think we've got the potential for this small level that we've got to grow with and to see it presentable. I'd love to see it more presented in cafes. And it's certainly a strong part of my business for at least 15 years, was quite strong in the cafe market. But it's been harder for all those cost constraints that cafes face these days, freight being another one. Before it became this freight crisis, it's been an issue. And the second grinder, I think that's the easy answer, is, you may well be linked with a roaster. It's hard around those contracts that are out there. But if they've got access to a second grinder and can make a second offering, and we're seeing much more of that, aren't we? The house blend and the specialty blend. Harass your roaster, ask the roaster to go, hey, find access to Australian coffee. I think there's enough green bean from the farms at the moment that really we should be able to see a stronger push, an easy way. And it's a very small, to have that access to the second grinder, be the coffee of the day, the coffee of the week.
Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing so many trends that are moving towards consumers wanting Australian manufactured or Australian owned businesses and to support those. So it would just be an incredible thing to be able to offer an Australian grown coffee roasted by an Australian business, sold in an Australian cafe.
And I haven't even told you about the biological factors.
Yeah.
If I can do a personal plug.
Yeah, well, please do.
People should come and visit. Cafe owners, roasters, you're really welcome to visit Zentveld's Coffee Farm and Roastery. I personally host tours every Friday, except when I'm in Melbourne by now. and my family members kick in, and Christy works for me well. So you could come and see how coffee can be grown really quite biologically. We barely use any synthetic inputs. I'm very open about if we need to use a spray at all for a herbicide. I'll point out how rare that is, why that might be the case. You'll see our cover crops. So when we've just had 3 or 4 weeks of sunflowers and buckwheat in flower and the chicory blue flowers, and it's ridiculously pretty, but it's useful. We plant like a metre wide of these, what we call cover crops. And then the little young seedlings of these new varieties we're planting now in between them. So they're amongst the dappled shade of a sunflower. And then you see the bees come in and pollinate those flowers and the roots, and that's a beautiful thing. So we're very bee friendly because we have no pests or diseases. So we're not using any pesticides. So we've had bee producers come, and we've had a 5-year relationship now where we get our very own honey. So you can come to our farm and taste, truly, from November with such a good flower set, we're still selling the coffee blossom honey. And it genuinely is that, because that was the main flower in November. So that's what's been coming through the jars. And the next lot that come through might be the summer rainforest and, sunflower flowers coming through. But we've still got coffee blossom honey in store right now from last summer. So you can see the biological ways. You can see compost that we make on site to put out. You can see the rainforest the habitat that we've done. So, we have no fear of deforestation, which we know other nations have to consider. And certainly there's laws being changed coming into Europe. When they've asked Australians about the deforestation, it was like, pardon? The deforestation was done 150 years ago. We're reforesting. Most growers have actually got a rainforest belt. So we really are quite, green, considerate, biological farming Australia. And then we've got, real fair labour conditions and the local food miles with, less transport. We've still got our transport costs, but they're certainly using less diesel than shipping the beans from overseas. So there's some really lovely factors of why the real fair trade and biologically minded coffee grower are good fine points to help sell that coffee for people to try it in the cup.
Of course. And I just to take it back to what we were talking about a little bit before, we mentioned that 60, 80-year lull in growing coffee in Australia. Quite simply, why? What happened?
Instant coffee got invented. Though there were constraints between the wars or during the wars. So then less coffee was coming in. Well, that's constraints, which is why instant coffee kind of kicked in as well. Got invented. But the cost of production and the cost of labour, even in the 1920s, they've got those records to say it wasn't profitable enough for the growers. So even Australian labour conditions then would have been more than, perhaps the African, or if Brazil was producing back then. I'm not even sure. But we're all coffee back in Africa, back in the 1920s. That's some research I need to do. Yes. So it was a cost of production that meant, and of course they didn't have the equipment, didn't have a harvester, probably had very minimal wet processing mills. So you could grow it well, but then you've got to process it well. So we need our farmers to, be profitable through being efficient, good use of efficiency, and automation is coming.
I feel like I could speak to you about this topic for hours and hours and hours, which we unfortunately don't have. But I guess just one final takeaway to ask is that if you have one piece of advice, whether it be for a cafe owner who's looking at exploring the Australian coffee or Australian grown coffee landscape, or someone who might be considering growing coffee in Australia, or anyone throughout that chain, what would it be? What is that one little nugget of advice that you'd love to?
Look, the Australian coffee, it's sweet and chocolatey and delicious, and people will love it. Yeah. So go for it. Yeah. Grow it, serve it.
Sounds like a perfect end point. So thank you again, Rebecca, so much for giving us some of your time and having a chat with me. And I can't wait to see what's next for
Thank you.
Australian
Appreciate it, Dan.
coffee.
Well, maybe we can talk in about 4 years' time when these new varieties are starting to produce, and we really start to see how they are in the farming environment, and then we'll be taste testing and talking it up again.
Let's lock it in. I'll put it in the calendar.
Good. 4 or 5 years. Cheers.
Love it. And listeners, you can stay in touch with the BeanScene Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to follow us on socials at BeanScene Mag, or catch us in print every 2 months. Thank you for listening.